Hello, I'm Krista McAllister, and welcome to Serious Leadership. Whether you are growing your company, growing your career, or quite possibly both, thank you for listening. Today, I get to discuss one of my favorite topics, HR, with Donna Brown. Donna's a fractional CHRO, really works to create people-centered strategies that positions the company not just for growth, but also culture of creativity and continuous improvement. Donna, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Kristen.
It's just been not just amazing, but fascinating to watch over the last couple of years. I think that HR has become the fastest moving and evolving function in a company right now. Donna, what do you think are some of the drivers that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think, while in many companies, HR has had a seat at the table for a long time, I think that HR leading a business practice, which is central to the strategic success of a company, is a little bit of a new lens that forward-thinking CEOs and other business leaders have been applying. And when you think about from a market perspective, products are replicable, the way you do something is replicable. It really comes down to your people differentiating your business. And your HR folks are at the tip of the spear in making sure that you have the right people in the right places doing the right things, but then also opening up innovation, creativity, inclusion, so that you're getting the best out of the people that you have with you.
That puts a lot of responsibility and onus on human resources, which is what we're seeing in a lot of organizations right now, to be spearheading that and a number of initiatives. You really have to be a high performing team or group, or even just if you've got one individual, as you walk into organizations as that kind of fractional chief human resources officer, what are the signs that you look for to see if HR is enabling that growth or if it's hindering performance?
Mhm. What a great question. Um, I think I actually just did a talent assessment for one of my clients. And one of the things that I look for first is, are your people practices aligned? Is your talent aligned? Are you demonstrating through metrics that you are not only connected to, but enabling the business objectives? That's really the first thing that I look at to see if you have that well-oiled machine that you're talking about right now. Sometimes I go into a company and, HR has the basics and they're doing the basic things and they have the policies and, if payroll lives in
Yep, we're
HR, they're
compliant.
doing that, right?
Yep.
All of those transactional things. But what really accelerates growth in a company is that deep connection of those things and all of the other things that fall within the HR domain to the business objectives. And great HR people every day are out there demonstrating we should do X because it's going to do X plus 10 to the
Mhm.
business. Not we should do X because it's the latest and greatest, HR best practice. Sometimes HR teams, we tend to be a little bit inward looking and not outward looking. But I think what differentiates the work that my company and I do is everything we do starts with a business case
Mhm.
and demonstrates what it has the potential to contribute to business objectives, whether it's revenue or any of the other business metrics, because we're all competing for funding in, a world where money just doesn't grow on trees and get given out. And so part of what we do is justify, yes, we can have a menu of solutions, but here are the few key solutions that are going to have an outsized impact to your business strategy. And that's why we should do them.
You talked about the key performance indicators, and we're looking, are
Yeah.
we aligned? And we're looking at the measurements. And you didn't say we're looking at the top three HR KPIs. No, we're looking
No, no.
outside of HR. HR
Yeah.
is now accountable. What are the measurements in the other functions, the other departments, the business as a whole? Because those are the ones we need to move the needle on.
Yes, exactly. Listen, we can measure HR metrics for ourselves because that's how we improve our processes. But for the business, we should be measuring HR's impact on revenue, HR's impact on top line growth and bottom line expense. We should be we should be impacting customer retention. We should be impacting sales conversions.
Mhm.
And sometimes people hear that and they're like, "Well, what are you talking about?" Well, if we don't have the right talent strategies in place to drive sales, to drive customer retention, to enable those functions to do what they need to do in a way that doesn't include a lot of friction, that the organization enables them rather than hinders them to do things. The policies enable them rather than hinder them to do things. We find the right talent that this company needs. If all of that isn't working, that's where you start seeing negative impacts to those business metrics that are driving the business forward.
I love it. And we're enabling the other functions to happen. And it
Yes.
really starts with, a good solid HR foundation, which HR a lot of times has been built out of the leftover Legos from I
Shoe cobbler's children sometimes.
we see that quite a bit. The office manager becomes head of HR, and it just ends up getting pieced together like the
Yeah.
junk drawer in the kitchen. When you're starting to build that HR foundation, you've tasked someone with those first set of ownership and responsibilities for the talent in your organization. Regardless of budget, what are the non-negotiables in putting that initial framework or infrastructure in place?
Kristen, such a great question. You need a clear company purpose and stated values. And sometimes people roll their eyes and, they're imagining like, mission statement retreats from back in the 90s or something. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, the leadership team, the founders, whoever being very clear about what the company is there to do, what they're there to achieve on a broader scale. We're not down at the KPI level yet, but then also how they're going to go about doing it, which are the values, because everything that HR does from the purpose and values flows from that. How you hire, who you hire, the culture you create, your talent management strategies, your compensation and benefit strategies. Everything needs to be aligned and working as force multipliers
Hmm.
to that purpose through those values. In a recent client engagement, I had a CEO ask how he could know that he had the right people in place to deliver on the imperatives of his business strategy because they were about to make a pivot. And we conducted a talent readiness assessment, but as part of my own research in advance of the talent readiness assessment, that's exactly what I collected. And then I validated with all of the leadership. What's your purpose? What are your values? And we noticed that the values had shifted over time. And so then it was, okay, well, let's be clear. You're measuring this thing over here still in your performance management, which is fine. But when you're hiring people, you're looking for these other things. So let's talk about that. Let's figure out what it is because everyone, whether they're new to the company or whether they've been here for a while, needs to be marching in the same direction.
Hmm.
And it can be damaging if you have your initial people in the company that think the company is about one thing, and then you've got your newcomers to the company, they think it's about another thing. That can cause real dissonance. And so we had to spend some time before we even got into the talent portion of the conversation figuring out Is it a blend of those two things? Has there been a replacement? What are we going to do about that? Because that's how we then set the talent assessment.
I love that. It's that benchmarking. What does great look like in our organization? Now you've got
Yes.
something to compare it to. And you
Yeah.
hit on something that I hear from a number of business owners, and we're seeing it more and more, especially businesses that have been around for some time, and that the values and the purpose can shift. You know, a vision doesn't need to last 50
Absolutely.
years, and you see friction in the organization. You're not quite sure what's causing it. And we're seeing some of that friction caused by when new individuals come in the organization, what their understanding of those, the values, the expectations, the culture is different than, let's say, the legacy and individuals who were there 10
Hmm.
years ago, where the
Yes.
CEO made all that, everyone reported the CEO, and now they don't. Any
Hmm.
number of shifts will cause that. How do you go through that process of kind of bridging that gap, lessening that friction, while
Hmm.
respecting that legacy that was there? But you're right, it does shift. How do you reconcile?
Yeah. So that is a really critical part of business growth that is oftentimes overlooked. As you said, it could have been 10 years ago when this very tiny startup sat down, around a table maybe and said, what do we want our values to be? And when you're in that phase, that early stage of a company, you're thinking about different things than when you are now 500 people, let's say it's 10 years later and you're more mature in your industry and values have to be something else. That actually happened with another client of mine who was looking to implement a different kind of performance management system. Managers had been having conversations with people, but there was not really any kind of a structured process. People were talking about all kinds of different things. So I would say it was more of a coaching practice for people to get better at their jobs, not necessarily for them to grow in the organization. And when I was talking to the CEO, and he's describing the kind of people that he feels like he needs in the organization in the next year. Very, very different.
Oh, wow.
And some of that stuff went back to what do you value now? What's most important to driving your company forward? This is a performance marketing company, very, very invested in AI and looking at the fact that some jobs could probably be done better and more effectively
Mhm.
through AI. And how did we move people into a new position of adding value to the company? And did people have that sort of growth mindset and learning ability? And this is a CEO who's a super, super smart person, but thinks like telling is the thing. And so I said, well, we can't just tell everyone, here's the new stuff. We've got to talk to people. We've got to, really start socializing and put a why into the equation for why are we doing this? Why is the past way that we were looking at this company needing to change? How is it shifting? Engage people, really make sure that we have a pulse on the industry and what is going to be required of us in 12 months, in 18 months, in 24 months, because you're always arcing towards that. And, along the way, you're tweaking things as you need to tweak things.
We're communication. So we're seeing more and more of the
Times
time.
10 and
Yeah.
involvement. I would say and involvement because that's another thing that people sometimes get wrong is, well, I've communicated this, 25 times to my people and they must not get it. And I said, well, they might not get it. That's probably not true because you've done this 25 times, you have smart people. They might not like it. They might not buy into it. They might not want it. So let's really figure out what's going on in the organization, and one of the quickest ways to do that is by including people in the conversation, including them in the work, helping them arrive at the answer of, oh, we need to change this thing, or else we're not going to be as competitive as we need to be.
And
You've got
that
smart people working in companies. Everything does not have to come down from on high.
and that's that two-way communication. how do you create those feedback loops? What are some kind of invented or unique ways that you've been able to get individuals comfortable and safe and a channel to be able to communicate back of I am this makes absolutely no sense. I'm not hearing this. You're off the mark. This is unrealistic. Or this is great. And we can't even then do this. How do you get that feedback loop where everyone is involved in that conversation?
Yeah, and I would say I don't know that I've done anything particularly innovative, but what I'm really good at is taking snips from here and there.
Mhm.
We all know that psychological safety has been talked about for the last couple of years. It is the foundation. You have to make sure that people not only know because we tell them, but have experienced working in a place that values their ideas and where they're not punished for sharing ideas, for making mistakes, so on and so forth. That said, even when you have an environment that enjoys a high degree of psychological safety, you have to employ different methods for people to feel comfortable speaking up. Some people want to talk in a focus group. Other people would be totally mortified, and so maybe you do a survey. So some of the ways that I've been particularly effective in getting all the juiciness out, because you don't want the sound bites, you don't want employees telling you what they think you want to hear, you don't want the politics. You want to find ways for people to feel comfortable sharing their ideas. And so you're doing focus groups. You're doing brown bag lunches. You're doing anonymous surveys. You're doing polls. You're pulsing along the way. You're having lunch and learns about the business
Mhm.
so that we can tee up the questions by saying, listen, here's a part of the business that we think is going to be growing in the next few years. Here's a part of the business that we think is not going to be growing in the next few years. Do we want it to be growing? And is there a problem to solve? Or is it okay for it to remain as is? And educating people, getting them into sort of double clicking, triple clicking down into their understanding of the business so they can connect. Oh, this is the way I do my work. This business is not going to grow. We're going to try to maintain it. How do we do that? We've got to get super efficient so that this business stays alive, even though it's not going to necessarily grow. And so, what can we do to make efficiency improvements and operate better, more efficiently, more effectively, so that we can close the sort of revenue expense gap that's going to exist there? And by talking to people, not just about how they feel about things, which is valid. Employee satisfaction surveys, employee engagement surveys are still important. But when it comes to solving business problems, you need to educate them, include them, and then create a variety of forums to elicit their ideas.
And it's amazing when we get the feedback that that concept of continuous improvement, we're able to
Yes.
just continue to iterate. And you hit the company growth aspect of it is how we're going to grow. We've seen for decades how easily companies end up outgrowing the employees' capabilities or for the roles that we're
Mm-hmm.
in. And we've seen a shift in terminology. I've been watching it from, back in the day, decades ago, we had a training department. Then it became training and development. Then it became learning and development. And now we're starting to see it focus more on learning and growth. The growth of the
Yes.
company is dependent on the growth of the talent. How do we make more space, not just in HR, but in our company and in our thought processes to create that room for growth for the employees, not just the company?
Such a vital question. And I think first and foremost, and this I think goes along with psychological safety, in the best companies, there is a sort of an expectation that employees are going to grow with the firm. And if you don't grow, then something different happens. But if you're growing and you're learning new things and you're building new skills, then, there will be a place for you. right? Right now, AI, people are freaking out about what's this going to do to my job? Even though in all of the economies before, Web 3.0 or the judgment economy, whatever you want to call what we're, coming into right now,
Mhm.
um, you know, things have changed. Some jobs have gone away, other jobs have been created. So, we have this experience where things, can get a little dicey, but, eventually we end up in a better space because people are more activated in the work that they do. But letting people know that this is an expectation is really important. And giving people the space is really important. I have a little trick where I plan my learning in my calendar, just like a meeting. Because if I don't do it that way, I will not do it, right? All of a sudden, I'm back to back in meetings and I didn't read that article that I wanted to read. I've been recommending that to people in the organizations that I support for years. But there's so much access right now to knowledge and information that it's really not okay for employees to be stagnant. There is definitely a place for learning and development. There is definitely a place for skills-based development that are championed by companies.
Mhm.
But each one of us has access to a tremendous amount of information and knowledge that's free. And, one of the things I love I'm not affiliated with LinkedIn, but one of the things I love seeing in my LinkedIn feed is people getting their certifications, their badges in this, that, or the other thing. It's a visible, sort of validation that people are out there doing things on their own because they want to move into a different job. They want to get better. And so I think that, right now, what we look for in people is a growth mindset, people who have demonstrated that they can move to one thing and the next, because we're not 30, 40 years ago where jobs were more secure. We're in today. There's no expectation that I'm going to be with, my current company for more than a couple of years. And how do I protect myself from, the most extreme um hurts of being laid off? I make myself as marketable as I can possibly be. And I do that by having a growth mindset and being out there doing things.
Incredible advice. And it goes back to that old adage, if they're not growing with the company, they're growing out of the company. And we've got to grow.
Yes.
We've got to
Yes.
grow them and the responsible, which reminds me of someone suggests just a great question as you're getting to know candidates in interviews. Tell me about the last new thing that you learned.
Mhm.
Was that six
Yep.
months ago? Was it 6 days ago? And you really
Yes.
start to understand, are they, are they self-driving that? Or was it
Mhm.
through their roles? You've mentioned AI a couple times. This is just going to be the
Yeah.
month of podcast AI here at Cerius Leadership from
I
all
want
different
them all. I'm listening
perspectives.
to them all. I'm trying to learn from them all.
What's fun is the perspective from all the different functions of the art. It used to be that technology was owned by an IT person, and we're
Mhm.
seeing AI not just owned not just by each of the functional areas they're contributing to it, but really HR taking a front
Yes.
leading role in it because it was so integrated into ATS and in HRIS and now what learning and growth. It feels like it was showing up there years before any of us were even using the terminology on a daily basis.
Right.
What do you see as HR's role in kind of normalizing and evangelizing AI for team success?
That is such a great question. And here's where HR as your strategic partner really is going to be important. If you're AI native, you're a SaaS company and that's the way you built your company. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to everybody else who has a company that was doing things well before, any of this automation. And the first thing that really has to happen is leaders have to define their AI point of view. And who drives those conversations? HR drives those kinds of strategic conversations because they're conversations about organizations and people. right? What's the role in our workflows? What's on the other side of AI? What's our intention around this? Are we implementing AI so that we can reduce our workforce? Are we implementing AI so that we can take some of the, admin nonsense out of people's jobs so that, they can rise and do really, judgment-based value-added things? What value are you looking to create from AI? And what do you want AI not to do? That's another question. And, when we think about those kind of conversations, those are conversations that HR is driving in other aspects of the business. And so I think it makes sense for HR to have a seat at the table there. I think the other reason, and this really comes to the last question, with the first question and the last question, right? What do we want and what do we don't want? HR provides the guardrails, right, when it comes to people and organizations.
Mhm.
If we say we want to be a box and all of a sudden we look like we're becoming a circle, whoop, no, let's not go that route. And so by being clear on those things, HR can then begin to shape all of those organizational and people practices. Yes, lines of business are still going to, automation in IT, automation in call centers, automation in, the sales cycle, leveraging AI in different ways. But when it comes to, let's say, evangelizing acceptance of AI,
That's the big one.
here's our mission. Here's what we're not going to do. Here's our mission. Here's what we're not going to do. Encouraging people to give things a try, setting those expectations, and making sure, I think you mentioned AI being in HR systems for a long time, which is true, but more so AI showing up in our performance reviews. What are we being measured against?
Mhm.
There have been some great CEO letters that have come out recently about this is what we're doing with HR or with AI. And, everybody is going to be held to these standards. Super clear, super easy for HR to get behind that. But most companies, it's a more ongoing and organic conversation.
Any kind of clarity, even if it's just, here's how we're going to explore figuring it out. And
Mm,
that's one of the biggest things I hear from the management executive level as to why they left a company is it wasn't what I expected.
yeah.
You're right. I was hired in thinking I was going to sit in a box, and instead it was a circle, and that just didn't work for me. So the clarity up front that can be woven into the interviewing, the hiring practices, the onboarding, as it relates to AI and what they can expect, and then keeping it consistent with that, even as it's
Yes.
evolving, is huge. Shifting just a little bit, what are you seeing the broader HR community that really gives you hope for the future of work and how we support them?
My goodness. Well, I'm part of a few communities that are focused on the future of work and making work better. And they're not filled with just HR people. So that gives me a lot of hope. There are a lot of leaders today that believe there is a better way of work. There are a lot of leaders today who feel like some of our work practices are still stuck in the 70s and the 80s. And, we're now so well past that and taking advice from here and there from, example companies who have open source cultures and who have tried that, who have, really sort of flipped around organizations so that there are less bottlenecks at the top and
Mm-hmm.
more experts doing the work. There are a lot of great practices out there that leaders and HR are driving. I think a lot of this comes out of the education system. Thank you very much to our to our colleges and universities and MBA programs, because they're striving to prepare people to come in and really make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And the days of people sitting, being satisfied with this unsatisfactory situation and saying nothing, they're over. People
Yes.
are shouting from the rooftops about the experiences that they want to have at work. and how they want work to be integrated into the rest of their lives. And the best leaders and the best companies are listening. And so I think that's a super optimistic place for HR to be, because it's not only our voices that are saying that, it's, coming from leaders. And when you have that leadership mandate, it's super easy for HR to just say, "Oh, yes, thank you very much," and come in and do the things that we love to do to really activate talent.
I love that you hit on, I think, probably one of the biggest drivers, circling back to the beginning, that I've seen in the workforce is it used to be, here's a business model and here's how we're going to fit the people to it. And that's been flipped on its head. And the business model is now saying, we need to look at the workforce, the people, how they're doing the work, and we're going to need to adjust our business model to
Yes.
fit that between our customers and our talent. That's going to dictate our business model, not the other way around. And that's
Yes.
been a huge shift.
A really big shift. And just like our earlier conversation on values changing, business models change. You have sort of old school, here's six basic models that most companies fall into. But now you've got networked models, you've got, customer driven models, you've got, some of the agile teams that are doing, tribes and communities and all kinds of different things like that. I think, you know, testing what organizational model is right for you and letting your customers and the market drive what you need to do to be the most responsive,
Mhm.
that may not be organizing. Like, you think about you think about self-organizing teams, right? That are organizing themselves around
Mhm.
customer problems. And, it creates, for those of us who've been in the workforce for a while, it creates a little bit of a, oh, like, who am I supposed to talk to about that? Oh, I'm talking to myself for all of my great ideas because I'm the one that's leading, this customer solutioning with, people that I haven't with before. So
Mhm.
that's great. And then we're going to disband and we're going to go someplace else. So I think, your point on organizations being responsive to customers and to markets, and then sort of reverse engineering organizations, is something that is happening, and it's going to happen more and more.
One of my favorite CEOs who just runs a fantastic mid-sized organization, has almost no middle management, and continually gets asked, who's holding your people accountable? How are they being trained and developed? How are they doing anything? And he just says, they're coworkers. They work in teams. Their team is doing,
Hmm.
they're holding each other accountable. They're training, they're cross training. The scoreboard is holding them accountable. You're like, I don't understand why I need to hire people to do something that they're all doing with each other. And it really is
Hmm.
that self-performing, self-monitoring, self-managed teams that we're
Yes,
starting to
because they
see
know what
now.
needs to get done. I have a client that did the same thing, recently wiped out all of their middle managers, and they've got smart, dedicated people that are not only experts, but also, as you were saying, cross training, making sure that they've got resilient teams so that if somebody goes out on leave or whatever, they swarm in to cover that person's area.
Exactly.
And it's almost, I just said swarm and it tipped off in my mind. It's almost like a beehive,
Mhm.
because people have their individual jobs, but when it comes to a big job, then everybody sort of swarms in, gets that big job done, and then, goes back to doing what they were doing. So, yeah, the days of I need somebody at a higher rank than I am, that may or may not have experience in my space. And if they have
Mhm.
experience in my space, they may not be more experienced than I am. And having them, just because they've got a title and a rank, sort of telling me what to do, I don't think that that's long
I
for the future of companies.
spot on. Donna, thank you so much for sharing just your insights, but the
Yeah.
impact that you're making inside organizations. And thank you to everyone for joining Serious Leadership. If today sparked a new idea or gave you something to take away or act on, don't let it sit. Share it, use it, and keep growing. Donna, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And until next time, keep leading and just growing and learning, as we talked about today, with clarity and with confidence. Take care.